The next evening, Cottontail knocked on the big front door and was admitted to the palace. There she stood in her funny country clothes, but none of the other 4 Easter bunnies laughed, for they were wise and kind and they knew better. That's the Easter palace, where Grandfather Bunny lives. They showed her all over the palace, from room to room, all piled high with eggs of gold and silver, and eggs that glittered like snow, chocolate eggs, marshmallow eggs, eggs for all the children. Wherever they were in the world, there were eggs at the grandfather's palace. And then as soon as it was dark enough for the children to be asleep all over the world, the old kind grandfather gave the word, and the 5 bunnies set to work as fast as they could. First one, then another would take up a large egg or a pretty little basket, and in a single hop would be out of the palace and away out of sight. Then in a moment, he'd be back again, and before you could say Jack Robinson, he'd have whisked away again with another Easter basket for a child. Slowly the night wore away, and the bunnies began to look tired. They kept returning for more and more eggs to do their job. And in the palace, the glittering piles grew smaller and smaller as they did their job. Poor little Cottontail was very tired, for this was the first time that she'd ever gone so far or so fast in her life. And she was beginning to hope that she soon could take the little basket that was set aside for her own children and go hopping home. And that's when old wise grandfather called her to him. When she went close, she saw that he was holding in his hand the loveliest egg she'd ever seen. It glittered like a diamond. Peek through and see what you shall see, he said. What do you think is in this loveliest egg? So she peeked, and through the little hole in one end, she saw a beautiful scene with a sleigh and a lake with people skating on ice. And he said, because you have been such a loving heart for the children, I am going to give you the best, but the hardest trip of all. Far off over 2 rivers and 3 mountains, there was a great mountain peak. And in a little cottage on that peak is a little boy. He has been sick for a whole year. And he has been so brave, he hasn't cried about it. He hasn't complained about it. The mountain is so high, and there is ice on top of it, and it will be hard to climb. But if you get there, and if you deliver this egg, you will give more happiness to that boy than any other Easter bunny. Well, Mother Cottontail picked up the egg very gently and went hopping away on her journey. She crossed the first river, and then the second. She went over the first mountain, and then another mountain, and yet another, until at last she reached the highest mountain of all. Here she is on her trip. She was very tired when at last she got to the bottom of the great peak, and her heart failed her when she saw how high it was and how slippery with ice and snow on top. But holding the egg very carefully, she started hopping up to get to the top of the mountain, to the little boy's house. And at last she reached the ice and the snow, and now she was almost to the top, and she could see the little cottage all covered with snow where the little boy was sleeping. But then a terrible thing happened. There she is at the bottom of the peak. She has to go all the way up to the house. Let's find out what happened. Her foot slipped, and down she came. Downward she flew into snowdrifts, and then she left ice and snow and rolling and bouncing against the stones, and she felt the air getting warmer. Down, down she went, and she crashed through a thicket of budding laurel, rolled across the pasture, and finally struck against the trunk of a great apple tree that was just getting ready to bloom for Easter. And there she lay, with the egg still safely clutched in her paw. But she had a big, great pain in her leg, She had rolled so far. She tried to rise again because she saw a lovely pink light in the sky, and she knew that in a few minutes it would be day, and if the little boy would be so sad if he didn't get the egg that she had for him. But the pain in her leg was so bad she fell down. And then she felt something touch her shoulder, and she looked up, and right there before her, what do you think it is? Was old, wise Grandfather Bunny. And he smiled at her. He didn't seem upset like she thought he would be, because she hadn't delivered the egg. You are not only wise and kind and swift, but you know you are also the bravest of all the bunnies, and I shall make you my very own gold shoe Easter bunny. And he reached over, and she saw for the first time he was holding a tiny pair of gold shoes in his hand. And he bent down and he put them on her feet. Suddenly all the pain left her leg, and she stood up and picked up the precious egg. You see the golden shoes behind his back? Those are the ones he put on her feet. Then before she knew what was happening, she felt a sudden motion, and she found herself flying high in the air. Over the pasture she flew, over the laurel that she'd fallen in, over the stones, and until at last when she landed, she looked back and she saw that not one single jump, and it had carried her halfway up the mountain. Look at her in her special golden shoes, flying high. She jumped once again, and there she was at the cottage door. Quickly she squeezed through the tiny crack that had been left open. Just in case a bunny had come all that way, the little boy had left the door open, just a crack, hoping the Easter bunny would come to his house. And in the hand of the beautiful sleeping boy, she placed that very special egg. Then, just as the Easter morning sun rose over the edge of the world, she jumped quickly back to the palace, where she found her little basket for her very own little bunnies and went hopping back to give them a happy Easter. Mother Cottontail found that the garden was tended, and sure enough, just as she had said, everything was in order. The bunnies had all helped to take care of the house when she was gone. The floors were swept, and there were 2 lovely new pictures painted and hanging on the wall. The dishes were washed, and they shone in the cupboard all crystally clear. The colors were washed, the clothes were mended, and her 21 children were all sound asleep in their beds. And the little house of Mother Cottontail can always be told now from all the other homes of all the other bunnies, because in a special place on the wall, on a very special hook, hangs a pair of very tiny little gold shoes. Happy Easter. I have one more book that I'd like to read. So if you go to the next video for Easter, it's a short book, but it's a book that I have read since I was a little girl, and we can enjoy that one together too.